The courtroom was thick with a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight, broken only by the sharp, cruel laughter that echoed from Chloe Vane. Standing beside Mark, she was a vision of polished perfection in designer silk, her manicured finger pointing with venomous precision at Sarah Jenkins, who sat across the aisle. Sarah was a stark contrast, her body heavy with pregnancy, swollen with discomfort, and trembling from sheer exhaustion. For Chloe, this wasn't just about winning. It was about utter annihilation. She wanted to tear Sarah down, piece by agonizing piece. Leaning into the microphone, Chloe's voice dripped with a venom so potent it was almost tangible. She mocked Sarah's appearance, cruelly labeling her unfit and pathetic for clinging to a man who had so clearly moved on to brighter, shinier things. But the smug smirk plastered across Chloe's face was soon to be brutally erased. Judge Evelyn Stone, a woman who had observed the entire spectacle with eyes as cold and sharp as flint, leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. She posed a single, simple question. One seemingly innocuous question, yet it held the power to completely upend the entire case, to expose a secret so dark and deeply buried that it would ruin them all, leaving their carefully constructed lives in smoldering ruins. The divorce papers had arrived on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, a day that was supposed to be etched in Sarah Jenkins's memory as a moment of pure joy. It was the very same day she had discovered the gender of her baby. The plan was a small, intimate dinner with her husband, Mark, a quiet celebration where she would reveal that they were having a boy. Instead, she walked into an empty house, the silence amplifying the dread that began to creep into her bones. On the pristine marble of the kitchen island sat a large, ominous manila envelope. Sarah stood frozen in the foyer of their sprawling Seattle home, a house that was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a testament to her dreams, a physical manifestation of the life she had meticulously crafted. As an interior decorator, she had poured her heart and soul into every detail, and every corner of the house whispered of the beautiful future she had envisioned, a future that now felt like a cruel mirage. But the silence that evening was heavy, almost predatory, filled with unspoken truths and shattered promises. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside, she found a petition for dissolution of marriage. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp that echoed in the cavernous space. The papers slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the floor like fallen leaves. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, where her son kicked, a small, innocent reminder of the unbreakable bond that was currently being severed on paper, reduced to legal jargon and cold indifference. "Mark," she called out, her voice trembling, barely a whisper. There was no answer, only the hum of the refrigerator, a monotonous drone that seemed to mock her solitude, and the distant sound of rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a melancholic symphony of despair. She frantically dialed his number, only to be met with the impersonal voice of his voicemail. She dialed again, her hope dwindling with each unanswered ring. Same result. Panic, cold and sharp as shards of ice, began to rise in her chest, constricting her throat and stealing her breath. She wasn't just losing her husband. She was losing her entire foundation, her stability, everything she had worked for. And she was 7 months pregnant, vulnerable and alone. Mark Jenkins was a powerful man, a partner at Jenkins and Ross, one of the city's most ruthless corporate law firms. He was a master of manipulation, adept at dismantling people, their reputations, and their lives. He did it for a living, a skilled surgeon wielding the scalpel of the law. But Sarah never imagined, not in her wildest nightmares, that he would turn that machinery on her, that she would become his next target, his next conquest. The front door clicked open an hour later, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the strained silence. Sarah spun around, desperately wiping the tears from her face, clinging to the hope of an explanation, an apology, a simple mistake that could be rectified. Mark walked in, but he wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm like a parasitic vine was Chloe Vane. Sarah knew her, of course. Everyone knew Chloe. At 24, she was a paralegal at Mark's firm, her ambition burning brighter than any discernible intellect. She was beautiful in a sharp, synthetic way, a manufactured perfection that seemed to lack any genuine warmth. And tonight, she was looking at Sarah not with sympathy, or even indifference, but with undisguised triumph. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief and pain, gripping the edge of the kitchen island for support, her knuckles white. "What is this?" "The papers." "And her?" Mark didn't even bother to look at Sarah. He glanced at his watch, then at Chloe, as if checking a prearranged schedule. He was a handsome man, tall and imposing, with graying temples that usually gave him an air of distinguished sophistication. Tonight, they only made him look cold, calculating, and utterly heartless. "I didn't want to drag this out, Sarah," Mark said, his voice devoid of any emotion, as flat and lifeless as a stone. "I've moved out. My things are already at the penthouse." "The penthouse?" Sarah repeated, her mind reeling, struggling to grasp the enormity of his betrayal. "Mark, I'm pregnant. We're having a son. You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted smoothly, his words like a slap in the face. "And I have. Chloe and I have been together for 6 months. We're in love. And quite frankly, I'm done pretending that our marriage is working. It's been dead for years." "Dead for years?" Sarah's voice rose, cracking with incredulity and anguish. "We went to Italy 3 months ago. We planned the nursery last week." Chloe stepped forward, her heels clicking loudly and deliberately on the hardwood floor, the sound grating on Sarah's raw nerves. She looked Sarah up and down, her eyes lingering with disdain on Sarah's swollen ankles and the loose maternity dress she wore, a symbol of the life Chloe so clearly despised. "Oh, sweetie," Chloe purred, her voice dripping with condescension, a sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. He was just being nice. He didn't want to stress the baby. But let's be real. Look at you and look at him. Mark needs a partner who matches his status, not a nesting hen. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her pale and weak. "Get out of my house." "Actually," Mark said, finally looking her in the eye, his gaze cold and unwavering, "it's my house. I bought it before the marriage. The deed is in my name. You have until the end of the month to vacate." "You can't do this," Sarah cried, stepping toward him, her voice pleading. "I have nowhere to go. My family is in Ohio. I can't travel this late in the pregnancy." Mark sighed, adjusting his cufflinks with a dismissive air. "Talk to my lawyer, Sarah, but I'd advise you not to fight. I'm offering you a small settlement. Take it. If you fight me, I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. Not the house, not the money, and certainly not the baby." Sarah froze, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Mark said, opening the door for Chloe, his voice devoid of any remorse. "I'm a lawyer, Sarah. I know how to paint a picture. An unstable, hormonal, unemployed mother. I'll get full custody before the ink is dry on the birth certificate. Don't test me." They walked out, leaving the door wide open to the cold, rainy night, the wind howling like a banshee. Sarah stood there, the wind whipping the divorce papers across the floor, realizing with sickening clarity that the man she loved hadn't just left her. He had declared war. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were a blur of nausea, fear, and lawyers. Sarah had managed to hire a lawyer, a man named Mr. Elias Harrison. He was older, semi-retired, and worked out of a small, cluttered office above a bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar a constant reminder of a life she could no longer afford. He was cheap, which was all Sarah could afford after Mark froze their joint bank accounts the morning after he left, effectively cutting her off from any financial lifeline. "He's playing dirty, Sarah," Mr. Harrison said, looking over the files with a deep frown etched on his face. "He's claiming you've been mentally unstable for years. He has affidavits from witnesses, probably his friends, claiming you're prone to violent outbursts." "That's a lie." Sarah slammed her hand on the desk, then winced as the baby kicked hard, a sharp reminder of the stakes. "I've never hurt anyone. I'm a decorator. I arrange pillows." "I believe you," Harrison said gently, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. But in court, the truth is malleable. Mark is powerful. He's trying to starve you out so you settle for pennies. But Sarah refused to settle. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her son, for his future, for their survival. She moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, using the last of her personal savings. It was a stark and brutal contrast to the luxury she was used to, a symbol of her fallen status. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled of stale smoke and despair, and she spent her nights weeping, holding her belly, feeling the weight of her responsibility. Meanwhile, Mark and Chloe were living their best life, flaunting their happiness with cruel abandon, and they made sure Sarah saw it, every agonizing detail. Chloe began a relentless campaign of digital harassment, a calculated assault on Sarah's already fragile emotional state. She posted photos on Instagram constantly, a carefully curated slideshow of their perfect life. Her and Mark at a gala, them on a yacht, them in the nursery Sarah had designed, which Chloe had now renovated with gaudy gold accents that screamed of nouveau riche tastelessness. She tagged Sarah in every post, rubbing salt into her wounds with captions like, #upgrade, #married up, #real love, #sorry not sorry. But it didn't stop at social media. The digital torment bled into the real world, a constant reminder of her humiliation. One afternoon, while Sarah was grocery shopping, counting her pennies to buy prenatal vitamins and bread, she ran into them. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. Mark was pushing a cart filled with expensive wine and steaks, a stark contrast to the meager provisions in Sarah's basket. Chloe was hanging onto his arm, wearing a tight white dress that seemed to defy the laws of physics. They spotted Sarah in the cereal aisle, their eyes locking with predatory glee. Sarah tried to turn her cart around, to escape the inevitable confrontation, but Chloe was too fast, her stiletto heels clicking on the linoleum floor like the ticking of a bomb. "Sarah," Chloe called out, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness, but loud enough to turn heads, to ensure maximum public humiliation. "Oh my God, Mark, look, she looks huge." Sarah gripped the handle of her cart, her knuckles white. "Leave me alone, Chloe. We just wanted to see how you were doing," Chloe said, stepping closer, deliberately invading Sarah's personal space, her perfume a cloying assault on her senses. "Mark was worried you might be, neglecting yourself. You look so tired. Are you sure you're fit to raise a child? You can barely take care of your hair." Shoppers were starting to stare, their eyes filled with morbid curiosity. Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a blush of shame and anger. She was wearing sweatpants and a messy bun because she could barely bend over to tie her shoes, let alone style her hair. "I'm doing fine," Sarah said, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "Mark, please tell her to stop." Mark looked at Sarah with a mixture of pity and disgust. His eyes filled with a contempt that cut deeper than any knife. "She's right, Sarah. You look like a mess. This is exactly what I'm talking about in the filing. You're letting yourself go. How can you care for a baby when you look like a homeless person?" "I look like this because you cut off my access to our money," Sarah snapped, her voice rising in desperation. "I'm living in a motel, Mark." "Choices, Sarah," Mark said coldly, his eyes as hard as granite. "You chose to fight the settlement. This is on you." Chloe laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed through the aisle. "Don't worry, Sarah. When we get custody, I'll make sure the baby is dressed in designer, unlike you." She reached out and poked Sarah's stomach, her touch possessive and demeaning. It was a violation so sudden and shocking that Sarah recoiled, stumbling back into a display of canned soup. The cans crashed down around her, creating a chaotic, deafening noise, a metallic avalanche of humiliation. "Oops," Chloe smirked, feigning innocence. "How clumsy of me." Sarah lay on the linoleum floor, soup cans rolling around her, tears streaming down her face, her body racked with sobs. Mark didn't offer a hand. He didn't check if she was hurt. He simply put a protective arm around Chloe and steered her away from the crazy woman on the floor. "Let's go, honey," Mark said loudly, for the benefit of the onlookers, his voice dripping with false concern. "It's sad to see her like this." As they walked away, Sarah lay there humiliated, clutching her stomach, feeling the weight of their judgment. But in that moment of absolute rock bottom, something inside her shifted. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that solidified in her bones. They thought she was weak. They thought she was just a nesting hen they could kick aside without consequence. They were wrong. She picked herself up, ignoring the whispers of the strangers around her. Their eyes filled with pity and disdain. She wasn't just a wife anymore, a discarded accessory to Mark's success. She was a mother, and she was going to burn their world to the ground, even if she had to do it with soup cans and a motel budget. The court date was set for 2 weeks later, and Sarah was ready. The Superior Court of Seattle was an imposing building, all gray stone and high pillars, designed to make you feel small, insignificant in the face of the law. On the day of the hearing, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that mirrored the tension inside courtroom 4B. The air was thick with anticipation, a silent battleground waiting for the first shot to be fired. Sarah arrived early with Mr. Harrison, their presence a stark contrast to the polished arrogance she knew she would face. She wore her best remaining dress, a simple navy blue maternity gown she had steamed in the motel shower, hoping to at least project an image of composure. She looked tired, yes, the dark circles under her eyes a testament to sleepless nights and constant worry. But she held her head high, her eyes fixed on the battle ahead. Mark and Chloe arrived 10 minutes late, deliberately making a grand entrance, their arrogance radiating like a tangible force. Mark was flanked by 2 junior associates from his firm, carrying boxes of files, a show of force designed to intimidate. Chloe was dressed as if she were attending a funeral for an enemy she hated. Black lace, red lipstick, and diamonds that caught the fluorescent lights, a visual declaration of war. The presiding judge was the Honorable Evelyn Stone. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she saw the nameplate. Judge Stone was a legend in the state, a formidable force to be reckoned with. She was known as the Stone Wall, a testament to her unwavering integrity and her zero tolerance for nonsense. She was 60 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back into a severe bun and reading glasses perched on the end of a sharp nose. She was known for having zero tolerance for theatrics and a deep hatred for arrogance, qualities that Mark and Chloe seemed to possess in abundance. Mark, however, seemed unfazed, confident in his ability to manipulate the system. He whispered something to Chloe, and they both chuckled, a sound that grated on Sarah's nerves. He clearly thought his reputation as a high-powered corporate attorney would give him the upper hand, that he could charm or intimidate his way to victory. He was used to golfing with judges, not standing before them in family court, his carefully constructed world about to be shattered. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. Judge Stone swept in, her black robes billowing behind her like a storm cloud. She sat down, arranged her files with meticulous precision, and peered over her glasses at the courtroom, her gaze sharp and assessing. Her gaze lingered on Chloe for a second too long, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before shifting to the lawyers. Case number 49201, Jenkins versus Jenkins. Judge Stone announced, her voice raspy and authoritative, commanding attention. "We are here for a preliminary hearing regarding asset division and custody of the unborn child. Mr. Jenkins, you are the petitioner. I am, Your Honor, and I intend to prove that my wife, Sarah Jenkins, is unfit to parent, and that our prenuptial agreement—" "There is no prenuptial agreement," Mr. Harrison interrupted, standing up slowly, his voice surprisingly firm. "Your Honor, Mr. Jenkins is referring to a document signed under duress 3 days before the wedding, which was never notarized properly." "We will get to the assets later," Judge Stone said, waving a hand dismissively. "I am more concerned about the immediate welfare of the mother and child. I have read the affidavits. Mr. Jenkins, you have frozen all joint assets." "I had to, Your Honor," Mark said, putting on his most concerned citizen face, the practiced expression of a man used to manipulating juries. "Sarah has been manic," spending recklessly. I was protecting the marital estate. Judge Stone raised an eyebrow, her skepticism palpable. I see a bank statement here showing she spent $50 at a grocery store and $30 at a pharmacy. Is that reckless in your tax bracket, Mr. Jenkins? Mark stiffened, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. It's a pattern of behavior, Your Honor. She is unstable. Unstable? Chloe spoke up from the gallery behind the plaintiff's table, unable to contain herself. She wasn't supposed to speak. She knew, but her arrogance and hatred got the better of her. She attacked me in a grocery store 2 weeks ago. She threw cans at me. The courtroom went quiet. Every eye fixed on Chloe. Mr. Harrison sighed and put his head in his hands, knowing the damage was done. Judge Stone slowly turned her eyes toward Chloe, her gaze like a laser beam. And you are? I'm Chloe Vane, she said, standing up and flipping her hair with a self-satisfied smirk. I'm Mark's partner and a witness to her craziness. Miss Vane, Judge Stone said, her voice dangerously low, the steel beneath her calm facade now fully exposed. Unless you are sworn in, you will remain silent. This is a court of law, not a reality television show. Sit down, Chloe, Mark hissed, tugging at her arm. Whatever, Chloe huffed, sitting down but rolling her eyes visibly, her defiance clear. Mark touched her arm to calm her, but the damage was done. Judge Stone had marked her, and Mark knew it. Your Honor, Mark continued, trying to regain control of the situation. Chloe is passionate because she has seen the abuse I've suffered. Sarah is vindictive. Look at her. He gestured to Sarah with disdain. She refuses to work. She leeches off my success, and now she's using this pregnancy as a weapon. Sarah felt the tears pricking her eyes, threatening to spill over, but she bit the inside of her cheek, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Don't cry, she told herself. He wants you to cry. I see, Judge Stone said, her voice flat, revealing nothing. She looked at Sarah, her gaze unwavering. Mrs. Jenkins, do you have a job? I was a freelance interior designer, Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice quiet but clear, filled with a newfound strength. But Mark insisted I stop working when I got pregnant. He said he wanted me to focus on the baby. Now no one will hire me at 8 months pregnant. She's lazy, Chloe whispered loudly, unable to resist one more jab. Judge Stone slammed her gavel, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. One more outburst from the gallery, and I will have you removed, Miss Vane, she warned, her voice icy. She turned back to Mark. Mr. Jenkins, you are a partner at Jenkins and Ross, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And your reported income last year was approximately $3 million? Judge Stone asked, picking up a piece of paper, her eyes gleaming. Approximately, Mark said, puffing his chest out slightly, his arrogance momentarily eclipsing his fear. And yet, Judge Stone continued, her voice laced with contempt. You have left your pregnant wife with zero access to funds, forcing her to live in the Starlight Motel on Route 9, a place I took the liberty of looking up this morning. It seems to have a rather dubious reputation. It's temporary, Mark said defensively, his composure slipping, until she agrees to the settlement. So, you are using poverty as a coercion tactic? Judge Stone asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm using leverage, Mark corrected, his arrogance momentarily slipping through. That's how negotiations work. Judge Stone stared at him for a long, silent moment, her expression unreadable. This is not a corporate merger, Mr. Jenkins. This is a family, and frankly, I am unimpressed. Mark's face reddened, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, to being challenged, to having his authority questioned. He leaned over to his junior associate and whispered something angry, his words inaudible but his frustration clear. Your Honor, Mr. Harrison said, seizing the opportunity. We are requesting immediate spousal support and the release of funds for medical expenses. Sarah has a doctor's appointment tomorrow she cannot pay for. Denied, Mark barked before the judge could speak, his control snapping. "We contest the paternity." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, a collective intake of breath at his audacity. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. "Mark, you know he's yours." "Do I?" Mark sneered, his eyes filled with malice. "You were spending a lot of time with that contractor during the renovations last year, weren't you?" It was a lie. A blatant, disgusting lie designed to delay the proceedings, humiliate her, and further damage her reputation. Sarah felt sick, the accusation a punch to the gut. Judge Stone looked at Mark with genuine distaste, her eyes filled with contempt. "You are requesting a paternity test?" "I am," Mark said, his voice smug. "And until that test proves the child is mine, I am not liable for a dime of support." It was a stalling tactic, a calculated move to further isolate and impoverish Sarah. Paternity tests couldn't usually be done safely until after the birth, or required expensive non-invasive procedures that Mark would likely delay approving, dragging out the process and bleeding her dry. He was trying to starve her out completely, to break her spirit. Chloe smirked from the bench, pulling out her phone to text someone, likely updating her friends on how well Mark was destroying his wife, reveling in Sarah's misery. "Very well," Judge Stone said, her face unreadable, her thoughts carefully concealed. "If that is the game you wish to play, Mr. Jenkins." "It's not a game, Your Honor. It's the law," Mark said smugly, his confidence restored. "We shall see," Judge Stone said, her voice laced with a hint of something that sounded almost like amusement. "We will recess for lunch. When we return, I want to hear testimony from your witness, Ms. Vane. Since she seemed so eager to speak, let's put her under oath." Chloe's eyes lit up, her face flushed with excitement. This was her moment, the opportunity she had been waiting for. She grabbed Mark's hand and squeezed it, her nails digging into his skin. She was going to go up there and tear Sarah apart, piece by piece, exposing her craziness to the world. Sarah looked at Mr. Harrison in panic, her eyes filled with dread. What is she going to say? "She'll lie." "Let her lie," Mr. Harrison said, a strange twinkle in his eye, his expression enigmatic. "Judge Stone is smart. Sometimes you have to give people enough rope to hang themselves." But Sarah wasn't so sure. As she watched Chloe and Mark strut out of the courtroom for lunch, laughing and confident, she felt a sense of impending doom, a chilling premonition that settled in her bones. They looked unbeatable, a united front of wealth, power, and ruthless ambition. She didn't know that the judge had noticed something, a small detail that had escaped Mark and Chloe's attention. She didn't know that while Mark was bragging about his income, Judge Stone had been looking at the financial affidavit Chloe had submitted as part of the case file, an affidavit that contained a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that Mark and Chloe hadn't even thought to double-check it, a detail that would ultimately unravel their carefully constructed web of lies. The storm was coming, and it wasn't the one outside. The afternoon session began with a heavy, suffocating atmosphere, the air thick with tension and unspoken secrets. The rain was now lashing against the courthouse windows, a rhythmic drumming that underscored the tension in the room, a constant reminder of the forces gathering outside and within. "The defense calls Chloe Vane to the stand," Mark announced, acting as his own lead counsel, his voice filled with confidence. He shot a smug look at Mr. Harrison, a silent taunt. Chloe walked to the stand as if it were a runway, her movements deliberate and self-assured. She had reapplied her lipstick during the break, choosing a shade of crimson that looked like fresh blood, a visual symbol of her intent to draw blood in the courtroom. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, her voice ringing with false sincerity, and sat down, crossing her legs and smoothing her skirt, projecting an image of effortless composure. "Miss Vane," Mark began, standing casually with one hand in his pocket, his posture relaxed and confident. "Please tell the court your relationship to the parties involved." "I am Mark's fiancée," she said, flashing a diamond ring that Sarah hadn't noticed before, a ring that screamed of wealth and possession, a symbol of her victory. Sarah felt a physical blow to her chest, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. "A fiancé already," The betrayal was complete, the knife twisting deeper. And I was an acquaintance of Sarah. And in your observation, how would you describe Sarah's behavior over the last year? Mark asked, his voice leading, guiding Chloe toward the narrative he wanted to create. Chloe turned her head to look directly at Sarah. Her eyes cold, devoid of any empathy, filled with a venomous hatred that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Erratic, dangerous. Honestly, I've been terrified for Mark. Sarah was always screaming, throwing things. She was jealous of his success. She refused to support his career. She just sat at home spending his money and getting, well, bigger. Objection. Mr. Harrison creaked to his feet, his voice filled with weary exasperation. Relevance regarding the plaintiff's weight? Sustained, Judge Stone said, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses, her disapproval clear. Ms. Vane, stick to the facts. The fact is, Chloe continued, unbothered, her voice rising in pitch, she's unfit. 2 weeks ago at the grocery store, she attacked me. I was just trying to say hello, to be civil, and she started screaming and knocking over displays. It was humiliating. She's mentally unstable, Your Honor. I don't think she should be allowed near a child. Mark deserves a safe home for his baby, if it's even his. Sarah gripped the edge of. Chloe gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles bone white. Each word she uttered was like a poison dart, expertly aimed. The way Chloe managed to portray herself as the injured party was truly a performance of the highest order, a twisted sort of art. Thank you, Miss Vane, Mark murmured, his voice laced with a silky, almost mocking politeness. No further questions for now. Mr. Harrison, the elder statesman of the legal team, rose slowly to his feet. Fatigue etched deep lines into his face. He gathered his notes, the rustling of the papers a stark contrast to the tension in the room, and lumbered towards the witness stand. Miss Vane, the old lawyer began, his voice a low rumble. You've testified that you've been living in fear of Sarah. Is that your claim? Yes, Chloe declared with a theatrical flourish. And yet, if I understand correctly, you moved into her home, sharing the space, before she had even fully moved out herself. You even slept in her bed? Harrison inquired, a hint of incredulity coloring his tone. Chloe shrugged, a dismissive gesture. Mark asked me to. He needed my support during that difficult time, emotionally and otherwise, so I was there for him as a friend, period. You stated earlier under oath that Sarah is financially irresponsible, prone to impulsive and wasteful spending. Could you clarify that statement a bit, please? She buys junk, useless trinkets and baubles. Things she doesn't need, Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes. She contributes nothing financially. Mark foots the bill for absolutely everything. The house, the cars, the lavish vacations they take. She's nothing but a leech, sucking him dry. I see, Harrison said, his expression impassive. He paused, glancing down at a document in his hand, as if seeking guidance from its contents. And you, Miss Vane, your professional background is as a paralegal, am I correct? What would you say your annual salary is? Objection. Mark thundered, leaping to his feet. Relevance? I don't see the relevance to any of this. It speaks directly to the witness's credibility, specifically regarding her assessment of responsible financial management, Harrison countered smoothly. Overruled, Judge Stone declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. Answer the question, Ms. Vane. I make $45,000 a year, Chloe stated, lifting her chin, a defiant spark in her eyes. But Mark takes care of me. He provides the finer things. He certainly does, Harrison muttered almost to himself. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. Sarah felt a wave of icy despair wash over her. Harrison's questioning had been weak, almost pathetic. He hadn't landed a single blow. He hadn't exposed Chloe's carefully constructed web of lies. Chloe stepped down from the stand, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face, and even dared to wink at Mark as she passed him. They were sure they had won. They thought the old lawyer, the addled judge, and the crazy wife were finished, defeated. But in their arrogance, they had overlooked one crucial individual in the room. Judge Evelyn Stone wasn't looking at the lawyers or at the smug mistress. Her gaze was fixed on a file that had been sitting innocuously on the corner of her desk, a manila folder that had been quietly subpoenaed by a diligent court clerk. Its contents concerned those renovations Chloe had so proudly bragged about earlier. Ms. Vane. Judge Stone's voice sliced through the courtroom, sharp and clean as a razor. Please retake the witness stand. I have a few questions of my own for you. Chloe froze, halfway to her seat. She shot a questioning look at Mark. Mark frowned, a flicker of unease in his eyes, but he nodded reassuringly. Go ahead, honey. It'll be fine. Just answer her questions honestly. But it was not fine. A knot of apprehension twisted in Chloe's stomach. She reluctantly sat back down, her initial confidence beginning to erode, replaced by a subtle air of annoyance. She adjusted the microphone. A forced smile plastered on her face. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Stone deliberately took off her reading glasses and slowly, methodically cleaned them with a soft cloth. The silence in the courtroom stretched, becoming almost unbearable, each second amplifying the growing sense of unease. When she finally placed the glasses back on, her eyes, magnified by the lenses, were intense, laser-focused entirely on Chloe. Ms. Vane. The judge began, her voice deceptively calm. You testified under oath that your romantic relationship with Mr. Jenkins began approximately 6 months ago. Is that, in fact, correct? Yes, Your Honor, Chloe replied, her voice slightly less assured than before. We fell in love very quickly. It was unexpected but undeniable. And you also testified that you consider Mrs. Jenkins to be financially irresponsible because, as you put it, she wastes Mr. Jenkins's money. That's what you said, is it not? Yes, that is absolutely right. She squanders his hard-earned money on frivolous things. And you? The judge gestured with a pen, the movement precise and deliberate. You are a paralegal. You understand the legal concept of perjury, correct? You are fully aware of the consequences of lying under oath. Of course, Chloe scoffed, attempting to regain her composure. I know the law better than she does, she added, jerking a thumb dismissively at Sarah. Good, Judge Stone said, her tone still deceptively mild. She opened the file in front of her, the crisp sound of the pages turning echoing in the silent courtroom. I am looking at a receipt for the renovation of the nursery in the marital home, the renovation you mentioned earlier, the one with the, shall we say, distinctive gold accents. Do you recall that particular renovation? Chloe forced a smile, a flicker of nervousness betraying her. Yes, I designed it. It's beautiful. A vast improvement over the drab, childish thing Sarah had initially picked out. The receipt is dated October 14th of last year. Judge Stone read aloud, her voice devoid of emotion. That is, to be precise, 14 months ago. Mark shot to his feet abruptly, his face flushed with alarm. Your Honor, with all due respect, I fail to see the relevance of this line of questioning. Sit down, Mr. Jenkins, Judge Stone barked, her voice suddenly amplified, filled with an authority that brooked no argument. The sheer force of her command made Mark drop back into his chair, as if he'd been physically struck. She turned her attention back to Chloe. 14 months ago, Ms. Vane. That is, if my calculations are correct, 8 months before you claim your relationship with Mr. Jenkins even began, and a full 6 months before Mrs. Jenkins even announced her pregnancy. Care to explain this discrepancy? Chloe blinked rapidly, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Well, I was simply helping Mark as an employee at that time. I have an eye for design and he valued my input. That's all there was to it. Is that so? Judge Stone flipped a page in the file, her eyes narrowing. Then perhaps you can explain why the invoice for the custom-made gold crib, a rather extravagant piece, I must say, is clearly signed by one Chloe Jenkins? The room went deathly silent. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Mark, a mixture of shock and betrayal in her eyes. He was pale, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, refusing to meet her stare. It was a joke, Chloe stammered, her confidence cracking, her voice barely a whisper. Just a silly little joke between us, Your Honor. Nothing more. A joke? Judge Stone repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. Forgery is a joke to you, Ms. Vane? But that's not what truly interests me. No, what truly interests me is this. The judge leaned forward, her gaze intense and unwavering. You claimed Sarah was a leech, that she was irresponsible with Mark's money. You claimed you were the responsible one, the prudent one. And you claimed you only started dating Mr. Jenkins 6 months ago. All of that is what you testified. Judge Stone held up a bank statement, her hand steady. So, can you explain to me why, according to this transfer record from an account in the Cayman Islands, the $250,000 used to pay for that nursery renovation, and indeed the substantial down payment on the luxury penthouse apartment you are currently residing in, came directly from Sarah Jenkins's private inheritance trust fund? Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? That's impossible. I don't understand. That's a lie. Mark shouted, jumping to his feet once more. That account is closed. It hasn't been active in years. It is now, Judge Stone said, her voice icy, her gaze never leaving Chloe. Because you drained it, Mr. Jenkins. She turned her attention back to Chloe, who was now visibly trembling, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the terror in her eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the frightened look of a child caught red-handed. So here is the question, Ms. Vane, Judge Stone said softly, her voice dangerously low. The one question that will determine whether you walk out of this courtroom a free woman, or whether you leave in handcuffs. The judge paused, allowing the suspense to build, waiting until every person in the room was holding their breath, hanging on her every word. Did you knowingly conspire with Mr. Jenkins to siphon over $3 million from his wife's private inheritance over the course of the last 2 years, while brazenly pretending to be his loyal employee? Or were you simply too incompetent, too naive, to realize that the credit card he so generously gave you bore the name of the woman you so casually mocked in my courtroom today? Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked desperately at Mark, her eyes pleading for guidance. Mark was shaking his head frantically, mouthing the words, "Shut up, shut up." But Chloe Vane was not a woman who willingly went down with a sinking ship. She was a survivor, and in that split second, she realized that Mark had used her, manipulated her, just as ruthlessly as he had used Sarah. If she lied now, with that damning document in the judge's hand, she was facing a long prison sentence for fraud, conspiracy, and a whole host of other charges. She looked at Sarah, broken, pregnant Sarah, and then back at Mark, who was sweating profusely through his expensive, custom-tailored suit. I didn't know it was her money, Chloe whispered into the microphone, her voice cracking, barely audible. Then she screamed it, the sound echoing through the stunned courtroom. I didn't know. He told me it was his. He told me she was broke, that she didn't deserve any of it. He gave me the card and told me to sign whatever I wanted. He said he was hiding the money so she wouldn't be able to touch it in the divorce. He said it was all for her own good. Pandemonium erupted in the courtroom. Accusations flew like shrapnel. He admitted to hiding assets, Judge Stone declared, her voice booming over the rising tide of noise. Is that what you're saying, Ms. Vane? Yes. Chloe was crying openly now, mascara running down her face, streaking her cheeks. He's been moving money for 2 years, laundering it through offshore accounts. He said he was going to leave her destitute with nothing so she'd lose the baby. He made me do it. I was just following his instructions. Mark slammed his fist on the table, his face contorted with rage. You stupid bitch. You're lying. All of it is lies. Restrain the plaintiff, Judge Stone shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. 2 burly court officers stepped forward and grabbed Mark by the arms as he lunged towards the witness stand, his eyes fixed on Chloe, promising unspeakable vengeance. Sarah sat frozen in her seat, her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. It wasn't just a divorce. It wasn't just an affair. It was a heist, a meticulously planned and executed robbery. Mark hadn't simply fallen out of love. He had methodically robbed her blind, stripping her of her security, her dignity, while she was carrying his child. Judge Stone banged her gavel repeatedly, the sharp, resounding blows finally silencing the room. She looked at Mark, who was now being held back by the bailiffs, his face a mask of purple rage. Then she looked at Sarah, her expression softening, just for a fleeting moment, a flicker of compassion in her eyes. "This hearing is no longer about custody," Judge Stone declared, her voice ringing with authority. "This is now a criminal matter. I am turning this case over to the authorities immediately." The chaos that erupted in courtroom for B was unlike anything the Superior Court had witnessed in years. The bailiffs had Mark pinned against the defense table, his face a mask of fury as he screamed obscenities at Chloe, blaming her for his downfall. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, the realization dawning on her that her immunity, her carefully constructed safety net, had evaporated the moment she admitted to signing forged documents. Judge Stone was the only calm person in the room. She was writing furiously on her docket, her face set in grim determination. "Mr. Jenkins," Judge Stone's voice cut through the din, amplified by the microphone, demanding attention. "You are hereby held in contempt of court. Furthermore, based on the sworn testimony of your co-conspirator and the overwhelming evidence of grand larceny and fraud presented by the court's independent audit, I am ordering you to be taken into immediate custody. Bail is denied due to significant flight risk." "You can't do this," Mark spat, struggling against the bailiffs as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I am a partner at Jenkins and Ross. I know the governor. I have connections." "You were a partner?" Judge Stone corrected, looking down at him over the rim of her glasses, her expression one of disdain. "I imagine that once this transcript is released, your partners will be shredding your contract before you even reach the holding cell. Get him out of my sight. I am done with this circus." As they dragged Mark away, kicking and screaming, he locked eyes with Sarah. He expected to see fear, perhaps even tears. He expected to see the weak, hormonal woman he had so callously mocked for months. Instead, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. Sarah wasn't crying anymore. She was watching him with a look of absolute cold indifference. There was no anger, no sadness, no pity. Only a chilling emptiness. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch, until the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his protests, his threats, his very existence. Only then did Sarah let out a long, shaky breath, her hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. Mr. Harrison placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and support. "It's over, Sarah," the old lawyer said softly. "It's finally over. The assets are frozen. The forensic accountants will recover what's left of the inheritance. You're going to get the house back. You're going to be all right." But the drama wasn't quite finished. As the adrenaline began to recede, leaving her body weak and vulnerable, a sharp, searing pain ripped through Sarah's abdomen, doubling her over. She gasped, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet courtroom, and dropped the glass, spilling its contents across the floor. It shattered into a million pieces, a chilling metaphor for the destruction of her marriage, her life. "Sarah," Harrison asked, alarmed, his voice filled with concern. "Are you all right? What's happening?" "The baby?" Sarah whispered, clutching her stomach as another wave of pain hit her, stronger this time, more insistent. It's time. I think the baby's coming. Call 911. Please, someone call an ambulance." Judge Stone shouted from the bench, dropping her judicial demeanor instantly, rushing down the steps to assist. The next 12 hours were a blur of sirens, flashing hospital lights, and agonizing contractions. Sarah was alone in the delivery room, with only the nurses to guide her. There was no husband to hold her hand, no partner to breathe with her, no loving support. But as she pushed, as she fought through the pain, she realized she didn't need Mark. His absence wasn't a void, a gaping hole in her life. It was a relief, a liberation. She was bringing her son into a world where his father couldn't hurt him, couldn't control him, couldn't taint him with his darkness. At 3:42 a.m. Amidst a raging thunderstorm that shook the hospital windows, Liam Jenkins was born. He was small, screaming, and, in Sarah's eyes, absolutely perfect. 2 days later, Sarah was sitting up in her hospital bed, cradling Liam in her arms, when Mr. Harrison knocked softly on the door. He was holding a plush teddy bear and a thick file, his expression a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "He's beautiful," Harrison smiled, placing the teddy bear gently on the nightstand. "He's safe," Sarah corrected, stroking Liam's downy head. "That's all that matters." Harrison sat down in the visitor's chair, his gaze fixed on the sleeping infant. "Mark has been formally charged with 6 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Chloe took a plea deal this morning. She's testifying against him in exchange for a reduced sentence, probation, but her career is effectively over. The Bar Association has already stripped Mark's license to practice law." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. "Good. He deserves everything he gets." "There is one thing I still don't understand, Sarah," Harrison said, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Judge Stone is an old friend of mine. We go back 30 years. She told me something rather interesting yesterday, and I confess, I'm intrigued." Sarah turned to look at him, a question in her eyes. "Oh, what's that?" "She told me that the anonymous tip that led the court clerk to subpoena those renovation records, the tip that ultimately brought down Mark's entire house of cards, it came from an encrypted email address, and it was sent 3 months ago, long before I even took your case." "Who do you think sent that email, Sarah?" "I think you know." Harrison leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Mark thought you were clueless. He thought you were just a nesting hen, obsessed with pillows and baby names. He thought you were too stupid to understand what he was doing. But you knew, didn't you? You knew about the accounts, the transfers, everything, long before he even filed for divorce. So why, Sarah, why didn't you say anything sooner?" Sarah looked down at her sleeping son, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "Mark is a narcissist, Elias," Sarah said softly. "He leaves his laptop open, unlocked. He talks loudly on the phone because he thinks I'm too stupid, too emotional, to understand anything about finance or the law. I saw the transfers to the offshore accounts 6 months ago. I saw the text messages to Chloe. I knew exactly what he was doing, who he was doing it with." Harrison looked stunned, his jaw practically hanging open. "But why didn't you confront him then? You could have saved yourself the motel, the humiliation, the public spectacle. Why wait? Because if I confronted him, he would have hidden the money better. He would have covered his tracks. He would have gaslit me, dragged it out for years in the courts, and I would have lost," Sarah said, her voice hardening, all traces of sadness gone. "I needed him to get overconfident. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to be so arrogant that he would bring his mistress into a courtroom and lie under oath. That was the only way I could expose him." She looked up at the lawyer, her eyes fierce, blazing with a quiet determination. "I didn't play the victim, Elias. I played the bait and he swallowed it whole. Hook, line, and sinker." Harrison sat back, a look of profound respect on his face. The twist wasn't that the judge saved Sarah. The twist was that Sarah had orchestrated her own salvation, using Mark's own ego as the weapon against him. 6 months later, it was the day of reckoning, the day of judgment. The federal courthouse was a world away from the chaos of the family court. It was colder, sterner, and devoid of the messy domestic dramas that usually filled the hallways of the lower courts. Today, the air smelled of floor wax and impending doom. Mark Jenkins sat at the defense table, but he was a mere shadow of the man who had strutted into Judge Stone's courtroom half a year ago. His tailored Italian suits had been replaced by a generic, ill-fitting gray suit provided by his court-appointed public defender. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and graying rapidly at the temples. The arrogance that had been his trademark was gone, replaced by a twitchy, hollow-eyed desperation. He looked broken, defeated. He wasn't just facing a messy divorce anymore. He was facing the full force of the United States government. The charges were extensive, devastating. Wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. The forensic audit ordered by Judge Stone had uncovered a complex web of deceit that went back years, revealing a pattern of criminal behavior that was far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Mark hadn't just stolen Sarah's inheritance. He had been laundering money through shell companies for questionable clients, using the law firm's accounts as a shield, a way to conceal his illicit activities. When Sarah's inheritance hit his radar, he saw it as an opportunity, a quick and easy way to plug the holes in his own sinking ship, to maintain his lavish lifestyle, and to avoid the consequences of his own mismanagement. The gallery was packed. Former colleagues from Jenkins and Ross were there, not to offer support, but to witness the final nail in the coffin of the man who had nearly ruined the firm's reputation, the man whose greed had threatened to bring them all down. And in the front row, sitting with a posture of regal calm, was Sarah. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a survivor, a warrior who had emerged from the fire stronger and more resilient than ever before. She wore a cream-colored blazer and held a small notepad in her lap. Next to her was Mr. Harrison, looking smug as he cleaned his spectacles, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The defendant will rise. The federal judge, a stern man named Justice Holloway, commanded. Mark stood up, his legs shaking visibly beneath him. Mr. Jenkins, Justice Holloway began, peering down at him from the high bench, his voice resonating with authority. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed in many forms, but rarely have I seen such a calculated, malicious dismantling of a spouse's life. You didn't just steal money, Mr. Jenkins. You attempted to steal a woman's sanity, her reputation, and even her child, all in a desperate attempt to cover up your own sordid crimes. Your behavior is reprehensible. Mark licked his dry lips, his throat constricting with fear. Your Honor, if I may, I was under immense pressure. The market, the economy, my judgment was clouded. I never intended to hurt Sarah. I still love her. I always have. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. A ripple of scornful laughter moved through the gallery. Sarah didn't react. She simply watched him, her face unreadable, her eyes devoid of emotion. Save your platitudes for the parole board, Mr. Jenkins, Justice Holloway snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. The testimony provided by your co-conspirator, Ms. Vane, was quite illuminating, shall we say. She detailed how you instructed her to forge signatures, transfer funds, and deceive your wife while your wife was in the hospital, suffering from pregnancy complications. You abused her trust, you manipulated her emotions, and you endangered her health. That is not clouded judgment, Mr. Jenkins. That is predatory. Mark flinched at Chloe's name, a mixture of anger and betrayal twisting his features. That had been the ultimate betrayal. Chloe, realizing she was facing a lengthy jail sentence, had flipped on Mark within hours of their arrest. She had handed over every text message, every email, every recording she had secretly made of him boasting about his plans, detailing his schemes. She had buried him to save herself, and he knew he would never forgive her. Sarah Jenkins, the judge called out, his voice softening slightly. You have submitted a victim impact statement to the court. Do you wish to read it at this time? Sarah stood up, her movements graceful and composed. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. She adjusted the microphone and looked directly at Mark, her gaze unwavering. For the first time in 6 months, he met her eyes. He looked for pity, for forgiveness. He found none. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice steady and clear, resonating with quiet strength. Mark Jenkins told this court that he stole because of financial pressure, that he was driven to it by desperation. That is a lie. He stole because he felt entitled. He stole because he viewed me not as a partner, a wife, but as an asset to be liquidated, a possession to be exploited. She paused, taking a deep breath, steeling herself. He told the world that I was unfit to be a mother. He tried to gaslight me, to manipulate me into believing that I was insane, that I was imagining things. He left me in a seedy motel room with $10 to my name while I was pregnant with his son, carrying his child. He abandoned me when I needed him most. But this isn't about the money, Your Honor. The money can be recovered. This is about the trust he incinerated, the lies he told, the damage he inflicted. I am not asking for vengeance, Your Honor. I am asking for safety. I am asking that my son grows up in a world where he knows that actions have consequences, that honesty matters, and that no man is above the law, no matter how expensive his suit is. She closed her notebook, her voice firm, unwavering. That is all. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken emotions. Justice Halloway nodded slowly, his expression grave. Mark Jenkins, the judge boomed, his voice echoing through the courtroom. On the counts of wire fraud and grand larceny, I sentence you to 144 months, 12 years, in federal prison. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $3. $2 million to Mrs. Jenkins. Officers, take him away. Mark let out a strangled cry, his face contorted with despair. 12 years. No, you can't do this to me. Sarah. Please, Sarah. Have mercy. He lunged toward the railing, reaching for her, his eyes pleading, desperate. Sarah. I'm the father of your child. Please, don't do this. 2 marshals grabbed him, hauling him back, his protests growing fainter as they dragged him toward the side door. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She simply watched as the man who had promised to love her forever, the man who had vowed to protect her, was dragged away. His screams echoing in the hallway until the heavy wooden doors slammed shut, cutting him off from her forever. Mr. Harrison leaned over, his voice filled with concern. Are you okay, Sarah? Sarah smoothed her blazer, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. I'm fine, Elias. Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm free. I'm finally free of him. The ruins of Chloe Vane. Across the city, far away from the drama of the federal courthouse, Chloe Vane was living her own personal sentence, her own form of imprisonment. She had avoided prison time thanks to her plea deal, but her punishment was a different kind of cage, a constant reminder of her mistakes, her failures. The legal community was small and word traveled fast. She was blacklisted from every law firm, notary office, and corporate HR department in Washington state. Her face had been splashed across the local news as the Mistress conspirator, the other woman who had helped a wealthy lawyer steal millions from his unsuspecting wife. Chloe sat slumped on a stool behind the counter of Pump and Grind, a cheap, 24-hour gym located in a bleak industrial district. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving her skin a sickly pallor. She wore a polyester polo shirt that was 2 sizes too big, with a name tag that sat crookedly on her chest. Hey, towel girl. A sweaty, muscular man grunted, tossing a used, damp towel onto the counter in front of her. Bin's full. Fix it. Now. Chloe stared at the soiled towel, her jaw tightening. A year ago, she was drinking champagne on a yacht, shopping for designer clothes with stolen credit cards. Now, she was towel girl, scrubbing toilets and wiping down sweaty exercise machines for minimum wage. I'll get to it in a minute, she muttered, avoiding eye contact. You'll get to it now, the man snapped, his voice laced with impatience. Or I'll tell the manager you're on your phone again, goofing off when you're supposed to be working. Got it? Chloe gritted her teeth, grabbing the spray bottle and a roll of paper towels. As she walked around the counter to wipe down a machine, she glanced up at the bank of TVs mounted on the wall. The news was on, and the headline blazed across the screen. Disgraced attorney Mark Jenkins sentenced to 12 years in prison. The camera cut to footage outside the courthouse. There was Sarah, looking radiant, confident, holding a baby carrier. Reporters were swarming her, but she looked calm, dignified, almost regal. The caption beneath her read, Sarah Jenkins, the whistleblower who took down a prominent law firm. Chloe felt a hot, acidic bile rise in her throat. It wasn't fair. She had done everything Mark had told her to do. She was just trying to secure a future for herself, to build a better life. Why did Sarah get to be the hero? Sarah was supposed to be the loser, the dumpy housewife who was too stupid to see what was happening. It was supposed to be her time. Housewife. Hey, Jim Rat! A patron bellowed. Less TV, more cleaning. Chloe attacked the machine with the spray bottle, each squirt a burst of pent-up rage and shame. Tears stung her eyes, blurring the already depressing view of the stale, mirrored gym. She'd bet everything on Mark's inflated ego, and she'd lost spectacularly. At 25, she was saddled with a fraud conviction, her future a bleak landscape of minimum-wage jobs and the constant, gnawing ache of regret. Judge Stone's question hadn't just ended the trial. It had detonated her entire existence. The life she knew was gone, replaced by this grim reality. For Sarah, the courtroom victory was just the initial skirmish. The real war was ahead, rebuilding a life that had been razed to the ground by Mark's calculated cruelty. The first few months with Liam were a relentless cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and bone-crushing exhaustion. Recouping the stolen money was a slow, agonizing process. Forensic accountants meticulously traced the funds, clawing them back from a labyrinth of offshore accounts hidden in the Caymans. For a while, Sarah and Liam huddled in a cramped, impersonal rental apartment, a far cry from the spacious home she had painstakingly decorated. There were nights when Liam's colic raged for hours, his tiny body arching in discomfort, and Sarah would sink to the floor, tears streaming down her face, the insidious voice of Mark echoing in her head. Was he right? Was she fundamentally unfit? Was she too damaged to navigate this path alone? But then she would look down at Liam's innocent face, so utterly dependent on her. His eyes wide with trust, and the steel in her spine would reassert itself. She would summon her resolve, fueled by a fierce love and a burning desire to create a better future for her son. She channeled her pain, her anger, and her unwavering determination into her dormant passion. She took the remaining funds from her depleted savings and officially launched Phoenix Interiors, a design firm with a purpose. She no longer desired to create cold, sterile spaces for soulless lawyers. She wanted to craft havens, sanctuaries where people could heal and find solace. Her first major client was a woman named Mariah, a survivor of a brutally abusive marriage who had just purchased a dilapidated fixer-upper. "I don't have much of a budget," Mariah whispered, her gaze fixed on the worn floorboards. I want the bedroom to feel safe. I haven't slept with the lights off in 5 years." Sarah knelt and took Mariah's trembling hand. "We're going to make it the safest room in the world." Sarah poured every ounce of her energy and empathy into the project. She scoured architectural salvage yards for reclaimed wood, its weathered surfaces whispering tales of resilience. She selected soft, textured fabrics in soothing colors, creating a tactile sense of comfort. She designed the lighting to be warm and gentle, mimicking the soft glow of dawn. She meticulously designed the room to feel like a comforting embrace, a cocoon of safety and peace. When Mariah finally saw the finished room, she dissolved into Sarah's arms, her body racked with sobs of relief. That moment, that profound connection with another woman she had helped, was worth more than any legal settlement, more than any amount of money Mark could have stolen. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Phoenix Interiors became a symbol of hope, a beacon for those seeking a fresh start. Sarah's story, the decorator who had outwitted a corrupt lawyer, became woven into the very fabric of her brand. She wasn't ashamed of her past. She wasn't trying to bury it. She was using it as a bedrock, building something beautiful and meaningful from the ashes. By the time Liam's first birthday arrived, Sarah had painstakingly bought back her original house, the house that held so many painful memories. But she didn't just move back in. She gutted it, tearing down the walls that Mark had favored, ripping out the cold, impersonal marble he had insisted on. She transformed the house into a vibrant reflection of her own spirit, filling it with warmth, color, laughter, and life. The afternoon of Liam's first birthday party dawned bright and sunny in Seattle, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The backyard buzzed with the happy chatter of friends, new clients, and the delighted squeals of children. Sarah was carefully cutting a slice of cake for Liam when the doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the cheerful din. She wiped frosting from her hands and walked to the front door, her heart skipping a beat. Standing on her porch was Evelyn Stone, the judge who had presided over her trial. The judge was out of her somber robes, dressed in a casual linen suit and a wide-brimmed sun hat, looking remarkably relaxed. She held a small, exquisitely wrapped gift in her hands. "Judge Stone," Sarah stammered, caught completely off guard. Sarah blinked, surprised. I didn't expect you to come. Please come in." The older woman smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine warmth. "In my courtroom, I am Judge Stone. But in your garden, I am Evelyn, and I wouldn't miss the birthday of the little boy who caused so much trouble in my docket." Sarah laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound that reached her eyes and ushered her inside. "Come in, please. There's iced tea and far too much cake." They sat on the newly built deck, overlooking the colorful garden, watching Liam gleefully smear strawberry across his face. "You know," Evelyn began thoughtfully, taking a sip of her tea, "I've been thinking a lot about that trial, about the day I asked Chloe that question, the question that ended it all." Sarah nodded, gazing at her son with a mixture of love and protectiveness. "Yes, but here's the thing, Sarah." Evelyn turned to look at her, her gaze both piercing and kind. "I asked the question because I saw the discrepancy in the dates. But the paperwork, the bank statements from the Caymans, they were organized perfectly, almost too perfectly. It was as if someone had carefully arranged the breadcrumbs, leading me precisely where you wanted me to go." Sarah swirled the ice in her glass, her expression unreadable, her gaze fixed on the vibrant blooms in her garden. Evelyn continued, "And that anonymous tip to the clerk's office, the one that exposed Mark's illegal activities, the IP address was traced back to a library computer, but the login used a temporary guest pass issued to a S. Jenkins." Sarah smiled faintly, but didn't turn away from her son. "Is that so?" "You knew," Evelyn stated, her voice firm, brooking no argument. "It wasn't a question. It was an undeniable truth. You knew the whole time. You let him humiliate you. You let him drag you to court. You let him think he was winning. Why wait?" Sarah finally turned to face the judge, her eyes clear and fierce. "Because Evelyn," Sarah said softly, "if I had fought him in the beginning, it would have been a simple divorce case. He would have hidden half the money, paid a paltry fine, and walked away to do it to someone else. He would have gotten visitation rights. He would have been in Liam's life, poisoning him with his toxicity." Sarah leaned forward, her voice laced with steel. "I didn't want a divorce. I wanted an exorcism. I needed him to commit a crime in the open. I needed him to perjure himself. I needed him to be so blindingly confident that he would completely destroy himself. I had to let him break my heart so he couldn't break my son's future." Evelyn Stone stared at the young mother for a long moment, her face etched with admiration and respect. Then, slowly, a look of profound understanding spread across her features. She raised her glass in a silent toast. "Remind me never to play poker with you, Sarah Jenkins. Deal?" Sarah grinned, clinking her glass against the judge's. As the sun began to set, casting long, warm shadows across the grass, Sarah picked up Liam, cradling him in her arms. He giggled, grabbing a fistful of her hair, his touch sending a jolt of pure joy through her. She held him close, inhaling the sweet scent of baby shampoo and sunshine. Mark was languishing in a concrete cell, his arrogance finally extinguished. Chloe was scrubbing down gym equipment, her dreams of wealth and status shattered. But Sarah was standing in the home she had built with her own 2 hands, holding the life she had fiercely protected, surrounded by the peace she had fought so hard to achieve. She had been mocked, scorned, and underestimated. But looking out at the vibrant horizon, Sarah knew the truth in her heart. She hadn't just survived the storm. She was the storm. And now, finally, the sky was clear. Sarah's story is a powerful and enduring reminder that arrogance often precedes a devastating fall. Mark and Chloe thought they could exploit the legal system to bully a pregnant woman, wrongly assuming that her silence was a sign of weakness. They learned, in the most brutal way possible, that a mother fiercely protecting her child is the most formidable opponent of all. Sarah didn't simply win a court case. She reclaimed her dignity, secured her son's future, and proved that while lies may sprint ahead in the short term, The truth ultimately runs a marathon and always prevails. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have patiently waited to spring the trap, allowing Mark to incriminate himself? Or would you have confronted him sooner, risking a less decisive outcome? Let us know in the comments below. If this inspiring story of justice and karma resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel to reach a wider audience. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new, compelling story from us. Thanks for watching.
My flat sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note a piece of me, forever here in harmony. My flat sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note a piece of me, forever here in harmony. Music lives inside my heart. Music lives inside my